I got a haircut too. Can you tell? Okay. So let's chat for just a second. We're a couple of weeks in. We've had a lot of assignments due. We've had a couple of exams due. So it's time to have kind of our regroup and talk things over chat. So there's a couple of things that I want to talk to you about. Thanks, Jesse. I appreciate it. Jesse said I look fresh with multiple H's. So the first thing I want to talk about is the listening assignments. Okay, I have been very lenient on your grades for the listening assignments so far. Generally, with the listening assignments, I will give you credit if you put an attempt in. Okay, if you make an attempt to do the assignment, I will give you credit for it. If you didn't get the exact answer, it's okay. Some of this stuff's a little hard, and that's fine. We will usually talk about things, and you'll be able to find the stuff. But some of the answers that I've gotten back are, I'm not sure that some of us are actually trying. Friday, I was going through doing a bunch of grading, and I was reading through some of these answers, and by about the fourth or fifth assignment, I was banging my head against the wall. So I want to make something clear to you, because we did go over these listening assignments before and how to complete them, but just in case we've forgotten or we need a reminder, because we did a lot of stuff on that first day, in your textbook, every single assignment that is, every piece that has a listening assignment attached to it has one of these listening outlines in your textbook. And for the most part, the answers for those listening guides, or for those listening assignments, can be found in these listening outlines or in the paragraph before that talks about the piece of music. So for example, your first listening assignment for part 3 is going to be over the Brandenburg Concerto. And I do expect you to read the textbooks. That's why I give you assignments based on the textbook. So there's a bunch of information here. And then they specifically talk about the first movement, which is what the listening outline is based on. And then they go through and tell you a bunch of stuff. So it might ask, what is the form of this piece? And I've gotten some really interesting answers when I ask about the form of the piece. All of these listening outlines will tell you the form. So for example, this Brandenburg Concerto is in ritornello form. Yes?
I have yet to get my textbook.
Because it's on back order still?
Yeah. So I am just...
How many of you are still don't have your textbooks from the...
Have you already paid for them? Yes.
If you've not paid for it already, I would say I would strongly recommend just going to Amazon and renting it for the semester. It's a lot cheaper, and they'll have it to you in like 2 days if you have Prime.
Or you could go back and ask for your money back and then get the Kindle app on your computer and then just buy it. It was literally $37.
$37 for the Kindle version. So you can do that as well. At this point, I'm not supposed to tell you that you can go get the textbooks at other places because of a contract that we have with the bookstore. But if they're not getting them to you in a timely fashion, they knew how many people were taking this class at the beginning. By the middle of the summer, they knew how many people were taking this class. If they didn't have enough books for you, that's on them. So if you want to go back to them and say, I need my money back, I'm going to get the book somewhere else, then that's perfectly fine. And if they give you any trouble, then contact me and we'll go through the right channels to make that happen. But if you've not, yeah, go to Amazon, get it for Kindle, get the Kindle version of it for $37, and you'll be good to go for the semester. Okay, so if that's the case, then you're forgiven for that because you didn't know. Now I will tell you that if you open up the PowerPoints, which I do have available also, a lot of times I have the information in the PowerPoints as well. Not all of it may be there, but some of it is there. Okay, but going through and reading these listing outlines and finding this information is part of the class. That's part of why I give you the assignments. So some of it is a little bit trickier, stuff that you've not done before. It's not all going to be common sense stuff because this is new to you. You've never studied music like this before. So you're going to need to go through and do a little bit of research. Now, some of the questions, though, for example, the one that probably made me bang my head against the wall the most was the Somewhere Over the Rainbow piece. Okay, you had the link to listen to it, but it's also somewhere over the rainbow. You can find that just by Googling it or YouTubing it. Most of us have probably heard that song before. One of the questions on there was, who sings this piece? Okay, which is an easy Google, because it was the version of it that I linked to was the version from The Wizard of Oz, so it would be sung by the actors there. Now, somebody put under who sings this piece as Harold Arlen, who is the person that wrote the piece. If you listen to the piece, you could probably guess that it was not sung by somebody named Harold, if you catch my drift. Okay? So we do have to use a little bit of common sense. And in that case, it's pretty clear that whoever was doing it hadn't even listened to the piece. That is part of the assignment, right? You don't have to listen to the whole piece. If it's a 20-minute long tune, you don't have to listen to the whole 20 minutes of it. What I would suggest, if I were doing these assignments, is to click on that link, open it up, and listen to it while you're working on the questions. If you do that, you've listened to enough of the piece for me to be concerned about it. Okay, you've gotten through a few minutes of the piece and you've found the information that you need. So we've got to use a little bit more common sense, is kind of what I'm getting at here. I am going to be a little more strict on grading those, just because of some of the stuff I've gotten back. So please make an attempt to find the right answers there. And if you struggle, if you're having trouble, if there's something you just completely don't understand, then ask me. Shoot me an email and I'll try to guide you into the right direction. Okay? So that is what we need to talk about with the listing assignments. I have also gotten a few emails from students regarding due dates, saying things like, I had no idea that this was due. And I want to make sure that we're all clear about this stuff. And again, we went over this before. You cannot just rely on opening the calendar in Blackboard, although they should all be there. All the due dates should be showing up there. But if they're not, the best thing that you can do, and what you should be doing every single week, is opening up Blackboard, going to the section that we're going over that day, and reading the little information thing. I don't need to check attendance here. Okay. So if you go to course materials, so today we're starting part 3. At the top of that, I've got all of the information that you need to know about part 3, which is everything for the next 2 weeks. Okay? It tells you what assignments are due when. So you have assignments 3.1 and assignment 3.2-4 and listening assignment 3.18. That's all that's due this week. Okay? That's due on Friday. Next Friday, you have assignments 3.5-8 and 3.9-15 and listening assignment 3.9-15. Those are all due next week. And exam 3 is next Friday, and it's due, if you do it online, on Monday at 8 a.m. Now, that 8 a.m. has been tripping some of us up. I got a few emails this morning saying at like 8:30 saying, where's the test? Well, it disappears. All right, it's set to automatically hide starting at 8 when it was due. Now, I can go back in and open it up if you need to take it late, but it's not going to automatically do that. Okay, so the test is always due by Monday at 8 a.m. the following Monday. All of them. All of the exams will have that due date. Okay, so make sure that you're checking this regularly, that you know what's going on. This section of the book is not a terribly difficult section, so this week is a good week to kind of catch up if you're behind on stuff, if you're trying to get stuff graded or get stuff turned in. You've got some time to do that. Okay. Kayla asked online, when am I going to be done grading listening assignments for part 2? That'll be sometime this afternoon. All right. I'll usually go through and grade everything that was turned in by Friday morning. I'll do some grading there, and then usually Monday afternoon I'll grade as well. So my Monday morning office hours are usually spent answering emails from the weekend, getting all the stuff ready for this week, and then my afternoon office hours from 2 to 3 is when I'll go through and grade stuff. the stuff that's due. So, and whenever I have assignments due, it's a lot of stuff. I have 6 classes. They're all the same. They all have 30 students in them. So usually on Monday, whenever I open everything up, I've got about 50 or 60 assignments for each class that's due. So then you multiply that out by 6. That's why it takes me a little while to do stuff. But it will usually be less than a week that I'll have stuff graded. Now, one more thing. If you turn something in late, I do not always get an email or a notification on Blackboard letting me know that you've turned it in late. Okay, sometimes I have to go back and do that manually. So what I need you to do is if you turn something in late, shoot me an email that says, hey, just letting you know that I turned these in. Also, if you turn it in and it's been a week and that grade doesn't update, sometimes it doesn't automatically adjust my grades whenever I go back and grade the new one. So again, just shoot me an email that says, hey, I turned this in about a week ago and it's still showing that I have a 0. Would you mind checking it? And I can go back and check that stuff. Okay. So I try to look through it pretty regularly, but again, I have so many students that I can't spend all of my time clicking on every assignment to see if you submitted it late. All right. So once it's past due, it's on you to let me know that you've turned it in. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So that's my Monday morning regrouping lecture. I'm not mad. I'm not upset at anybody, but just kind of regrouping and getting everything back in order and make sure that everybody knows where to find the information you need. Okay. One more quick thing. If you send me an email, please do me a favor and include somewhere in the email what day and time you have this class. Again, I have like 200 students. You're all taking the same class, and it's difficult for me to remember if I get an email from you exactly which class you're in. Okay, it all kind of runs together after a while. So if you'll just, down at the bottom, just put your name and then put like MWF 10. And that lets me know that you're in the 10 a.m. class so that when I go into Blackboard to start looking for stuff, I know what class to click on. Otherwise, I have to go to the portal and pull up the schedules and figure out who's in what, and it's kind of a pain to do that. So if you will, please just let me know what class you're in whenever you send me those emails, and that'll help some. All right, any questions about the general stuff before we kind of move on? Yes?
Last class you talked about taking tests late.
Yes.
How does that work?
So you have 1 week to take a test late. And you just have to let me know that you need to take it late so that I can open it up again to make it available for you. You either have to schedule a time with me if you want it to be proctored and don't want to have to use the webcam thing. You have to come in during my office hours so we can take it in person. Or you can go to the library or anywhere else. Since you have a laptop and you've got the stuff installed there, you can take it at home just like you would if you were doing things synchronously. You just have to let me know. And if you do that, you'll have to use the webcam option so that it watches you while you're taking the test. Okay. And again, you have, if you do that, if you take an exam a week late or up to a week late, you can only do that for 3 of the exams throughout the semester.
And do you still get like full credit?
Yes. Yeah, I will give you full credit. Okay. Life happens, especially this semester. Things are weird. Things are crazy. You know, my nephew is in 4th grade at Lisa Academy North in North Little Rock, and the entire 4th and 5th grade has been quarantined for the next 3 weeks. So they're all working from home. So my sister-in-law, who teaches at UALR, has to be home with her son now. So, you know, and I know many of you have kids as well. So if something like that happens and you are suddenly stuck at home with your kids all day, it's going to be a little weird. And we're trying to do everything we can to keep our semester rolling so that it doesn't throw everything off. But, you know, I'm willing to work with you. So the biggest thing, and this is synchronous people need to hear this as well. Usually those of you that come to class for the most part are caught up and ahead. Where some of us that are slipping a little bit are those that are doing things synchronously and may not be in that routine yet of realizing that if you're doing things synchronously or you're doing it as a web class, you have to be proactive. All right, it's on you to get that stuff done. You have to have a certain level of responsibility. The big thing though, and it's for me and every other class that you take here, is don't be afraid to reach for help. Okay, we are here to help you. That's why we get paid. Okay. Otherwise, they could have robots set up these entire classes and do all the grading for us. Okay. We're here to help. All right. I don't just teach because I want to give you all this information about music. I do love it, and I love talking about music to students. But I teach, and I specifically teach here because I like working with students, and I like helping students, do well and get through the things you need to get through. So please, if you start to slip behind, if you have a bad week, shoot me an email, give me a call, and let's talk through things, and let's see if we can get you back on track. Okay, and I guarantee that every one of your professors here at UACCM feels the same way. Okay. All right, that's my touchy-feely moment for the week. Really, for the semester, don't expect me to ever be that nice again. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me and ask me. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and jump into the next section. And we're going to do a little bit, I'm not going to dive too deep into stuff today. I just want to kind of give you the intro to the Baroque era today, and then we'll spend the rest of the next 4 lectures or class periods that we have before the next test. We'll mostly be listening and talking together about this stuff. But this is kind of the intro to the style. All right, so we are in the Baroque era now, and we're going to talk about music in the Baroque style, which, as the textbook words, the Baroque style flourished from about 600 to 1750 or so. So this is the next 150 years of music history coming out of the Renaissance. So Baroque literally means bizarre or flamboyant or elaborately ornamented. So any art that you find, whether it's visual art or music or architecture, is going to be very elaborate and flamboyant in nature. Okay, visual art tends, from the Baroque era, tends to be very busy. It tends to show a lot of motion. That's one of the reasons I have the textbook pulled up. Let me go back to the beginning of Baroque era here, and we'll kind of show you. It's a little bit dark in here, so those of you that are in class, it may be harder to see. A little easier to see. So the art of this time period tends to be fairly detailed, and it tends to imply motion. So there are things going on in this scene. We've got our Baroque orchestra here that's playing. Some of the more high art that you might come across in the Baroque era. Well, I guess this version of the textbook doesn't have a lot of it. Anyway, there's a lot of motion. There's a lot of movement in the visual art. Things are very elaborate and ornate. If you think about, so Shakespeare wrote kind of towards the end of the Renaissance and into the Baroque era. So if you think about Shakespeare's plays and the kind of over the top feeling that they all have, they're very dramatic. The comedies are very over the top. The tragedies are very tragic and melancholy, kind of like we saw at the end of the Renaissance era with some of those pieces like Flow My Tears. It has that kind of drama to it. We also see some changes in science and stuff like that. We're not going to talk about that in this class. All right. One of the big things about Baroque style in, again, both visual art and music is that it fills up the space. Okay. It never stops. If you look at a Baroque piece of music, it's busy. There's a lot of stuff going on. So in Baroque music, you don't see a lot of rest. There's constantly something moving, something playing. You might have noticed that in the Telemann Sonata or Concerto that we listened to at the beginning of class today. There's a lot of stuff happening. The Brandenburg Concerto, that's your first listening assignment piece, is a very busy piece of music. And that's one of the defining characteristics of the Baroque style. We take the idea of polyphony and having all these counter melodies happening at the same time, and we take it to the extreme. There's a lot of stuff going on to the point that it can get so complex that it's a little bit overwhelming and starts to sound dissonant. And what we end up seeing is by the early 1700s, we see that composers are starting to shift style. And the next era that we talk about, the classical era, is a dramatic twist from the complexity of the Baroque era. It gets so complex and over the top that by the time we get to the classical era, composers are saying, no, let's go back to simplicity. Let's make it simple again and easy to listen to. And that's why among non-musicians, classical era classical music tends to be the most popular. Baroque era is a little bit busy for most people, although a lot of people like Bach, who is one of the big composers of this time period. Okay, speaking of, in the Baroque era, we have two giants of Baroque music, and I believe that's an exam question, and they are George Frederick Handel and Johann Sebastian Bach. All right, they are the two main composers of this time period. Now, there's a lot of composers in the Baroque era, and we're going to look at some other pieces of music from other people, but those are the guys that had the biggest influence on music during this time period. Okay, in fact, the end of the Baroque era is actually marked by Bach's death in 1750. Okay. We do have several other notable composers, though, like Monteverdi, Henry Purcell, Corelli, Vivaldi. These are some of the more popular composers that are still studied and listened to a lot. And of course, we do have hundreds of other composers that are smaller, lesser-known composers, but some people will dig up their music and like it. Telemann is one of those. One of the reasons I picked Telemann is because he's very important to brass players, and as a brass player, I'm a big fan. Telemann wrote a lot of concertos and sonatas for the different instruments, and that kind of gives us a study of what was going on with the different instruments during this time period, for flutes and oboes and clarinet, and for trumpets even. So there's a lot of really great Telemann music out there, but he's not one of the major composers of this time period in general. We tend to divide this era into three phases, okay? So the first 40 years or so is the early Baroque, which tended to favor more homophonic textures. And we say that this is one of the most revolutionary periods in music history because we start to see a dramatic shift towards the harmonic language that we still use today. We start to hear chords and chord progressions that are still used in rock and roll and pop music today. Progressions like, if you think about, if you're familiar with Pachelbel's canon, the chord progression of Pachelbel's canon, let's see if I can do this without screwing up. So everybody knows the cello line from Pachelbel's canon, right? And the chord progression that goes along with that, I'm not going to play it that fast because I'll screw up, but is 1 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, 4 chord, nope, 3 chord, then the 4 chord, 1, then 4, then 5. And there are 1,000 rock and pop songs that use that. Most commonly, the direct ripoff of, I guess it's not even a ripoff, it's intentional, but if you're familiar with the Maroon 5 song Memories, which I cannot stand that song because it's so repetitive, it gets on my nerves, but that song uses Pachelbel's canon as kind of the main riff of the song, and even the melody comes from Pachelbel's canon. But there's a lot of variations of that chord progression. Or other variations of that. One of the most common ones that we hear today, I'm going to switch keys to make it a little easier on myself, is doing this chord progression. Again, thousands of songs that are written off of that basic chord progression. You can go back and you can actually look at, there's some lists out there that show the number of songs. It's something like 450 songs that have made the top 100. throughout the last century that are based off of that chord progression. And that's just the ones that are famous. Okay. One of the more common examples, several famous examples of it, Lauren Daigle's "You Say" is based on that chord progression. In fact, a lot of church music uses that chord progression. Green Day's what's the song? It's from Dookie. It's gonna drive me crazy. I'm gonna figure it out. Hang on. When I Come Around. That's what it is. Then you have to start playing it. Yeah, Green Day's "When I Come Around" uses the same chord progression. Just thousands and thousands of songs that use that same chord progression. So that's what we have happen in the early Baroque era. We have the shift to major and minor scales. Major and minor chords become common, and we start to hear music that's going to sound a lot more familiar to you because it uses the same harmonic system that the music you still listen to today uses. The middle of the Baroque era, the middle 40 years or so, from 1640 to 1680, is where we see that implementation, and by 1690, the major and minor scales have become the tonal basis of compositions. So the early Baroque, we start to develop that sense of this new harmonic idea, and then by the end of the middle of the Baroque era, we hear most composers using these major and minor scales and the common chord progressions that we still know today in music. And then at the end, the last 50 years of the Baroque era is where, actually really the last 70 years of the Baroque era, is where we start to hear, where we get most of the most popular music. Okay, this dominant chord to the tonic becomes a prominent feature. And what that means is the dominant chord is the chord that's based on the 5th scale degree. Okay, so if I take my C major scale and I count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's a chord based on the note G. So it's that chord moving to the tonic, which is based on the note C. All right, so this kind of chord progression becomes very common during this time. It becomes the way that we end our pieces of music. So we start in C, and we can even use that Pachelbel's canon idea. So where you have that, that's the dominant to the tonic. Okay, that gives us the feeling that we've reached the end. Da, 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 sol, sol, do is what really tells us we are at the end of the piece, and we start to hear that used a lot towards the end of the Baroque era. And by the time we get to the late Baroque era, instrumental music becomes even more important than vocal music. And we start to hear a lot of our classical instrumental music comes around during this time period. Whereas before, most of the instrumental music we were hearing was kind of folky dance music. By the time we get to the end of the Baroque, we start to hear concertos and early versions of what are going to become symphonies and things like that. Okay, so let's talk about some characteristics of the music here. We have this idea in the Baroque era called the doctrine of the affections, which means that the music has, we want music to express a mood or express an emotion. And that really becomes the goal of music, is to give us some kind of emotional idea or feeling there. Much like the literature, the drama of this time period, you know, you're either writing tragedies or comedies. So you want to have that specific emotion in your literature. So we also have that same idea in music. We start to have music that is either very melancholic or very uplifting and upbeat, or falls somewhere in between, but it gives us that defined emotion there. Rhythmically, the music has a lot of drive and energy throughout the Baroque period. There are clearly defined beats and rhythms that are popular. We hear a lot of rhythmic patterns that are used throughout. When we listen to the Brandenburg Concerto on Wednesday, you'll hear there's a lot of driving 16th notes through that. It has that drive to it. One of the more familiar pieces from the Baroque era is Bach's cello suite, right, which has that driving rhythm throughout the whole thing. It's got that flow to it. Right, something like that. And it has that driving eighth note pulse through the whole thing. The melody becomes extremely important during this time period, and we hear melodies repeated over and over again so that we can get that the melody kind of stuck in our head. Composers are writing melodies that they want to be memorable. They want it to be the basis for the whole piece. And that stays popular from the Baroque era into the classical period. We're going to listen to a piece that's called a fugue later on, and it starts with this idea. And we hear that melody repeated. In fact, you may have heard that before. You probably don't know where you heard it before, but it's going to be repeated over and over again, and that's one of the purposes of the fugue, which becomes popular during this time. We've talked about sequences before, and those again become very popular during this time. A sequence in a melody is where you take a phrase or a snippet of a melody and you repeat it at higher or lower pitches on the scale. So if I go, that's a sequence. I took the same basic idea, that running up the stairs, and I went over and over again. And sometimes you'll hear, so it's one of those tricks that composers use. You can, if you have a clever melody, an interesting melody, then you can compose a longer piece of music by just playing with it a little bit, using some of those sequence ideas to expand it out a little bit and make it more memorable, right? Again, a very elaborate and ornamental melodies here. There's a lot of stuff going on, and part of that ornamentation is actually improvised in Baroque music. The written music might be very plain, but they're going to actually ornament those melodies a little bit. So if you see a melody that goes it might be written like that on the page, but that's fairly boring. So the person that's playing it would probably go, and that was just expected in Baroque music for the performers to embellish what the composer wrote there. And in fact, when you study Baroque music as a musician, you have to learn that. I was assigned a piece of Baroque music when I was in college, and I came back, I learned it, I was great at reading notes and rhythms, so I came back into my lesson, and I was like, I can play this piece, and I played the tune, and my trombone professor was like, well, you got all the notes and rhythms right, but you didn't play the music at all. So I had to go back and study, since this is a Baroque piece of music, all the stuff that was traditional for Baroque performers to do. And I had to learn all of that stuff and kind of figure out that style to really be able to perform the music the way that it was supposed to be performed. Dynamically, we do see a lot of we do see what's called terraced dynamics. We don't see gradual crescendos and decrescendos. They tend to be, this section's loud, this section's soft, this section's loud, this section's soft, and it doesn't tend to change abruptly. It's like the opening section is a louder section, and then the next section is a little bit softer. It's not going to surprise you at all with the dynamics like we're going to see later on in music. Some other characteristics texturally, where later Baroque music is primarily polyphonic. There's a lot of different and new ideas of polyphony. I kind of already talked about that. We have an extensive use of imitation. That comes out of the fugue. And we start to see the organ and the harpsichord become the main keyboard instruments. The piano, as we know it, doesn't exist yet. It hasn't been invented yet during this time period. Instead, we have the harpsichord, which is a piano-like instrument. It's a little bit smaller. Let's see if I can. That's kind of a sort of harpsichord sound. So the way a harpsichord works is that on a piano, you have the strings and you have a felt-covered hammer that's hitting the strings, and that's what creates the sound. On a harpsichord, there's actually a little hook for each string that plucks the string like you would pluck a guitar or a banjo, and it gives us that weird kind of sound. It's not quite. There we go. There's our sound. It gives it that kind of pluck sound to it. You may have noticed that in the Telemann Sonata, you're going to hear the harpsichord quite a bit in some of the pieces that we listen to. Okay, that's where I want to get to today. We'll talk about the Basso Continuo on Wednesday and get into our first pieces of music. So try to do a couple of those listening assignments, or do a few of the pieces on the listening assignment so you're familiar with those tunes. And I will see you on Wednesday. If you have any questions for me, feel free to ask. Thanks, guys.